The itinerary listed Elmore Mountain Bread as the tour's next stop. I've been to Vermont enough times to know that most community gathering spots, all the stores, restaurants, and such, are typically located at the base of mountains. So as our tour bus made its way further and further up the winding road and stopped at a house tucked back in the woods, I could already tell Elmore Mountain Bread was not your typical bakery. I signed up for this field trip hosted by the Bread Bakers Guild of America simply because it was happening at the same time I was in New England visiting family. I saw a bread field trip in Vermont, and being a bread baker, I said, I'm in. And so far, it was all interesting enough. We had spent the morning touring a local wheat farm, chatting with farmers, and visiting a stone mill manufacturer. Next, we were heading to a bakery, where the grains moved from the land and into the baker's hands. Little did I know that this next stop would be where the tour would go from interesting enough to a personal and professional awakening. It wasn't just the bakery's remote location or the massive wood-fired brick oven that greeted you upon entering that caught my attention. It was the visionary behind it all, Blair Marvin. As the owner and lone baker, Marvin wasn't just aiming to pump out bread. She was trying to change her entire local food system. Her intention was to make bread the old-fashioned way, using 100% stone-milled local wheat. But when she started her bakery 20 years earlier, the days of New England being the breadbasket of America were long past, and sourcing Vermont grains wasn't easy. So she made a cold call to a farmer, which led to a partnership where the farmer agreed to trial growing wheat and Marvin would buy the first harvest. Her husband, Andrew, then designed and built a 700-pound stone mill they housed in their garage so they could mill these local grains fresh every day. This spawned another new family business, New American Stone Mills, which now supplies these grain mills all over the world. It wasn't long before Marvin went from not being able to source enough local wheat for their bakery needs to an entire Vermont grain-based infrastructure springing up around them. For Marvin, the concept was simple. Throughout history, every community had a farmer, a miller, and a baker that served as the center of the local food system. She believed that by looking to the past, she could find the future of bread and along the way, tackle much bigger problems like food sustainability. I walked away awestruck. Marvin was operating on a whole different level from any baker I'd ever met. She was a total powerhouse. And as a baker, I wanted to be her. But how do you do something like this when you live in a place that has no grain economy to speak of? How do I, as a bread baker, create something similar in Hawaii, where wheat isn't grown and hasn't grown here since the 19th century? It's a question I had been grappling with on some level since I started my sourdough microbakery, Makani Mills, in 2023. We have all heard the statistics. Upwards of 85% of the food in Hawaii is imported. The fact that 100% of the ingredients I need for my bread business are grown elsewhere has never sat right with me. I didn't know it at the time, but in a lot of ways, I was already thinking like Marvin, that to solve the food system problems of today and to make the bread of the future, I had to look to the past. There really isn't a pre-missionary bread history here that I can draw upon. But I was curious if the native plants that sustained people here for generations, canoe crops like kalo, ulu, and uala, could in some way be part of the solution I was seeking. I had been experimenting for a few years already with producing and using kalo and ulu flour for bread making. Up to that point, I sourced all my kalo from the school garden where I teach. snagging any extra they might have from a harvest so I could experiment with flour processing and recipe development. I spent countless hours digging into old scientific journals on the chemical properties of kalo and poi fermentation, pulling any nuggets of knowledge that might be useful on how to best employ these ingredients for baking. But after meeting Marvin and seeing Vermont's grain chain in action, I knew if I wanted to have a greater impact, if I truly wanted to be part of a solution to our complicated and multifaceted problem of food sustainability, I not only had to think bigger, but act bigger. My first goal was to have a bread that included cauliflower as a staple item on my menu every week. To do this, I was gonna have to produce a lot more cauliflower, which meant I needed to put down the scientific journals and move outside of my school garden. I had to make connections to the people here and start buying directly from farmers. Slowly, new relationships took root. I began buying 25 pounds, then 50 pounds of corms. The farmers taught me about the different native varieties and which ones might be best for flour making. I worked around my teaching job, early mornings, late nights, weekends, converting these rough corms into a soft lavender powder in order to meet the demand of having enough for weekly bread. By this January, I met the goal set 6 months earlier of offering a taro sourdough on my menu every week. And each week it is my most in-demand bread. The next goal I had was more personal. I understood that shifting towards using more local agriculture in my baking required forging a more direct relationship on my part with these plants. I've always strived to honor both the bread making process and the individual ingredients and how they are brought together. And when we're talking about an ingredient like kalo, there are deeper things to consider beyond just its absorption capacity or its flavor profile. Kalo, similarly to wheat, is one of the oldest cultivated crops in the world. It is not only a primary dietary staple here, but kalo holds an even greater role spiritually in Hawaiian culture. If I was going to use this as a central ingredient, I knew I had to approach this with the right intentions. And I discovered that once you hold the corm in your hands, learn all its parts, harvest it, plant a huli, listen to the stewards of its generational knowledge, and begin connecting all the dots on the social, cultural, political, economical, spiritual, physical, and culinary touch points that kalo intersects, it changes you. There's a kumu in my life that once told me that everyone finds their own way to the culture. It might be through mele or through hula. For me, it was through food. Perhaps not all that surprising of a pathway for an Italian. But Blair Marvin showed me the kind of role bakers can serve in communities, a role that at its best is reciprocal, where the baker supports the local farmer and the farmer in turn supports the baker, so we together can feed our community. I've learned that canoe crops have always represented this same kind of reciprocal relationship here. We care for the plants and in turn, they feed and nourish us. My journey in developing a relationship with canoe crops has awakened in me a greater understanding of this place, its history, and its people. It has changed me in ways I never expected and that are still unfolding. This month marked 20 years since I moved to Hawaii. I lived these 20 years here with the acute awareness that I am not from this place. But I wrongly believed that because I wasn't from here, that meant I couldn't allow Hawaii to get inside of me and become part of me. I thought that respecting this place as someone born elsewhere meant I had to maintain an emotional distance. We might not have a grain economy in Hawaii that I can tap into, But connecting with our canoe crops as a baker has shown me that I can be an essential link in our local food chain. And by doing so, perhaps I might find the bread of our future, one that is uniquely of this place and for our people. I'm Betsy, and I am from Waimea.